Senate Chamber. Signed. 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 Senate Chamber. Sound. Senate Chamber.
Okay. So good morning, members, and welcome everybody to this joint concurrent meeting of the Economy and Education Committees. So I would need to advise everybody just at the outset for this short bit of housekeeping that the committee meeting is now in public session and will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. And for anybody who is joining in the public gallery, you're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and all devices are muted. You can connect to Assembly Wi-Fi and the password details for that are on the gallery rules, and it's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. So we'll just, first of all, apologies, and to anybody tuning in, apologies for the delay in getting the meeting started, and hopefully that will be the only disruption for the remainder of the meeting. Item 1 on the agenda is apologies. So I have a couple of apologies. I have apologies from the Deputy Chair of the Education Committee, Pat Sheehan. I have apologies from Colin Crawford, and I have an apology for lateness from Danny Baker and Cathy Mason. I also have an apology from Kate Nicholl. Are members aware of any other apologies? No. Okay, that takes us to item 2. Do any members have any declarations of interest that they wish to make in relation to today's business? No. If anything should arise...
just go straight to the evidence and not do that.
Yeah, sure, no problem. In terms of declarations of interest, if anything should arise during the course of any evidence that members need to declare an interest, please do just indicate. Given the fact that we are a bit late, I'm going to skip Chairperson's business as there's nothing of any particular note that needs to be covered there. So we will move straight to item 4 on our agenda, which is the briefing, which is a joint briefing from officials from the Departments of Economy and Education, who'll be providing, they've provided some written evidence, but they were given their oral evidence today in relation to the cross-departmental delivery in relation to a range of issues, including career support, the review of CCEA Regulation, 14 to 19 framework, post-19 SEND provision, and the legislation which is being prepared in relation to compulsory training and education up to age 18. So officials will be able to speak to all of those in more detail in a moment. So I would just refer members, first of all, in their packs. We have a briefing from the Department of the Economy at page 24. We also have at page 41 of your packs previous briefings from both the Education and Economy departments on careers provision. We have the report from Dr Hughes, the Transforming Careers Support Report, that's at page 71. We have Department of Economy correspondence on the review of CCEA Regulation at page 207. And then we have a joint DE-DFE paper on the 14 to 19 framework from 2022 at page 240. Previous correspondence from the Department of the Economy on post-19 SEND provision at page 267, and a compulsory education consultation document from the Department of Education at page 272, and you'll be glad to know last item, volume 1 of the Independent Review of Education at page 324. So I hope you've all had time to read all of that information and digest it. So I'll just begin by welcoming the officials that we have here with us today, and then we'll move into the oral evidence. So joining us today we have Moira Doherty, who's the Deputy Secretary of the Skills and Education Group within the Department of the Economy. We have Clement Athanasiou, the Director of Apprenticeships, Careers and Vocational Education at the Department for the Economy. Mark Lee, Director of Higher Education and Economy. And then on the education side, we have Linsey Farrell, Deputy Secretary for Education Policy and Children's Services. Karen McCullough, Director of Qualifications, 14 to 19 Strategy and Statistics and Research. And finally, Andrew Scott, Director of Curriculum and Youth within the Department of Education. So, apologies for the very long-winded introductions there when we're doing everything in duplicate here, so it maybe takes a little bit longer. So I really at this stage I want to first of all thank representatives from both departments for agreeing to come to committee to provide evidence today in this concurrent sitting. And I'm going to really hand over to you at this stage. We've set out the issues that we're keen to hear about. So given that we have a joint briefing today, I'd ask for a briefing of up to 15 minutes in terms of any opening remarks you want to make, and then we'll move on to question and answer from members. We obviously do have a larger number of members in terms of timing the session, so we'll aim to keep contributions succinct and brief, and if members can work with me on that to get to questions as quickly as possible rather than any long statements, and we'll aim for maybe around 7 minutes per member for each contribution, but obviously there's a degree of flexibility depending on the nature of the issue being explored, but at this stage I will hand over to yourselves. I'm not sure who's opening. So.
Thank you. Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to brief committee members this morning on behalf of the Minister on the collaborative work that we're taking forward on foot of the education and training framework for 14 to 19-year-olds. I'm Moira Doherty, and I'm the Deputy Secretary of the Skills and Education Group within the Department for the Economy, and I'm accompanied by my departmental colleagues of Clement Athanasiou, who's the Director of Apprenticeships, Careers and Vocational Education, and our Director of Higher Education, Mark Lee. I'm going to say a few words before handing over to my colleague Linsey Farrell from the Department for Education, and we're planning to come in probably significantly under the 15 minutes because we're very conscious that there's a high degree of interest in the issues that we're here to talk about today, so we want to leave plenty of time for that discussion and questions. So both Ministers, Archibald and Given, have been really clear that strong collaboration between our departments is essential if we're to build an education and skills system that truly supports people throughout their learning and working lives. So the goal is to create clearer pathways, reduce fragmentation and respond more effectively to the needs of learners, communities and employers. And of course, this isn't always easy, so differing priorities, finite resources and organisational boundaries can all make joined-up working a challenge. However, we are committed to a common purpose of developing a more integrated, responsive approach to deliver lasting impact. And between our two departments, we support learners at every stage of their life and education journey. And the heart of it all is a fundamental ambition that learners would be equipped to thrive and fulfil their potential, to support better outcomes for their own lives, their communities and our economy. And we're all mindful of the practical challenges associated with working across organisational boundaries. However, last year, Ministers Murphy and Given tasked us with focusing on a small number of impactful priorities, beginning with careers and special educational needs, in order to develop a joined-up way of working. And having this mandate enabled our teams to deliver in these areas, testing shared approaches and developing deeper relationships to support more cohesive ways of working. And Ministers have now approved refreshed structures to build on these working practices, including through a cross-ministerial group. Our ambition is a more coherent skills and education ecosystem, one that recognises the strengths and focus areas of the departments and our delivery partners. The Ministers have been very clear that the 14 to 19 phase of education and training is crucial for all young people. Every young person should be enabled to fulfil their potential and be supported to develop the knowledge, skills and attributes needed for adult life. This includes preparation for work to which they are well suited, development of positive attitudes to continuing learning and active participation within the economy and their community. And we know that these are issues of really strong interest for committee members, and we welcome the opportunity for this discussion this morning. We look forward to highlighting this morning just some of the work that has been done to date to improve the quality and accessibility of our education and skills provision. And we hope that you found our written briefing a helpful introduction, and we welcome the questions on the approach to the various cross-cutting issues that we've highlighted there. And I would now like to hand you over to my colleague Linsey from the Department for Education. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. We really appreciate this opportunity to brief you this morning on the important issues that you have asked to consider today. My name is Linsey Farrell. I'm one of the Deputy Permanent Secretaries in the Department of Education, responsible for education policy and children's services. Really delighted to be joined by my colleagues Andrew Scott, Director of Curriculum and Youth, who is also leading in the department on the legislation around 16 to 18, and Karen McCullough, the Director of Qualifications and 14 to 19 Strategy. As Moira has already outlined, the shared aim of both of our ministers is to ensure that our young people are supported to succeed as individuals and as contributors to our society and to the economy. And to achieve this and deliver better for our young people, it's our collective responsibility to work together to deliver improvement across several really important cross-cutting issues that we're here to discuss today. We're very conscious of the need for alignment and for the need for greater coherence across that ecosystem that Moira talked about. It's really significant, and maintaining a focus on that common goal will help us to achieve the ambition of the 14 to 19 framework and indeed the other areas that we are here to discuss today. But we recognise that relationships and truly effective communication really must underpin that collective effort. And the structures that Moira has already referred to that have been approved by our ministers will be critical to help to foster these key elements of collaborative working. The theme groups that have been established already provide opportunities to share information and, importantly, to develop a mutual awareness and understanding of the work that's being taken forward and to sustain that required alignment through everything that we plan together and deliver together. The groups also enable us to consider where we can work together so that we're minimising the burden on our stakeholders and promoting more cost-effective and efficient ways of working. As members of both committees will be aware, there have been a number of several important reviews and reports that have included recommendations in relation to the range of cross-cutting issues that impact on the education of our young people, relating to qualifications, skills, careers, post-16 provision and pathways for all of our learners. This includes, amongst others, a fair start, the skills strategy, the independent review of careers, the independent review of education, and more recently, the publication of Transform Ed, the new education strategy that sets out a programme of reform. Implementation of the joint 14 to 19 framework cannot be considered in isolation from the actions set out in these other key strategies and initiatives. And so the approach being adopted for each theme is to consider the evidence, actions and recommendations from the range of strategies and reports and develop delivery plans that will address the cross-cutting aspects in a more coherent and strategic way. As you will well know, it's rarely the case that one action will fully address a particular issue, and it's in the range of actions coming together, sequenced appropriately and delivered in the appropriate choreography that will deliver the real impact for our children and young people. Another important element of our successful delivery is the ongoing engagement with stakeholders and delivery partners that really underpins the work of both our departments and is critical to the success of that work. Extensive engagement has been a core feature of the reviews and reports that I've already referred to, which have highlighted the issues and pointed to a range of potential solutions. In developing these solutions and moving to an implementation stage, we really value that continued engagement with stakeholders, and it's important that continues to be a feature. This is not only important in terms of securing an effective and workable response, but also to better understand the context in which things are happening across that ecosystem that we've already talked about. When our young people avail of the public services that we offer, they don't and shouldn't need to know that more than one department is involved. It's our responsibility to ensure that delivery of this important cross-cutting work is as seamless as is possible within those constraints that Moira has already spoken about. So what we have aimed to put in place are structures which facilitate that and which facilitate a more effective, efficient and coherent development and delivery in the interests of all of our young people. I'd like to thank you again for the opportunity to make these opening remarks. We're very happy now to provide more detailed information and expand on any area we've spoken about during this joint committee session. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those opening remarks. I would have to say at the outset, I hope that there's more detail coming in the session that we now embark on, because I haven't heard any real detail. It feels very, very high level in terms of what's been set out already, and certainly the written briefing was in the same vein. So if we go to the 14 to 19 education and training framework, and that's been in the mix as a part of the policy agenda since 2022, can you set out in those last 3 years what measurable achievements that we can look to say this is what we've delivered in terms of delivering that 14 to 19 framework? I haven't heard that so far, and I haven't heard anything different from our meeting a year ago. So I'd be keen to hear, in the space of measurable outcomes, things that have been delivered that will make a difference for young people in that ecosystem that you speak about. What's been delivered?
I think one of the fundamental things that we'd be very happy to give you considerable detail on, because I know it's of interest to certainly many members of the Economy Committee, and I imagine the Education Committee as well, is the very significant work that's been undertaken on careers. So in particular, and Clem, we were, as recently as Monday, we had an event in Mid-Ulster, and we were joined by colleagues from education as well as a range of other stakeholders looking at the careers portal. So that is one very, very significant IT project.
That's been in the mix since 2013.
So we're very happy to provide you.
That's my understanding.
Yes, we can give you the detail on where we are on that today and where that project has got to, and that is part of this much wider piece of work that's been undertaken over the last year, a joint piece of work on careers to produce a careers action plan that will look at, in particular, addressing the issues that many members of these committees have raised previously about access to professional and very tailored advice for young people that not only meets their needs for today, but also opens up to them.
So from 2022, what difference will a young person in that 14 to 19 bracket now be experiencing in terms of the careers advice they receive? What's changed? What's measurably changed?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's important we think about this in the broader round, and that the careers work we do is also about maintaining the services that we provide and enhancing that bit by bit as we go, alongside trying to set out longer term direction. So as we set out in our briefing, careers is growing importance. Things are becoming more complex, the economy is changing more rapidly, and I suppose one of the standard solutions you might think about is, well, we need to enhance the amount of services we provide, and unfortunately in the current budget context we have, that's not a possibility. So that's why we're turning to what we do have, and that's a strong commitment to collaborate through 14 to 19, and also the technological changes. So that takes us into the careers action plan and also the portal. So I'll maybe go through our work initially.
I suppose my question is, since 2022, what has changed in terms of the delivery of careers advice to young people in the system now?
As I say, I think when we look at delivery, I've got the same amount of resources to deliver the careers resource service as I do to change things. So things are happening on an iterative basis. So in terms of delivery, in terms of the year 12 cohort, this year alone there's been 21,000 people have been supported. 8,000 of those have had disability. There's been over 2,000 transition plan meetings, over 300 clients with an in-care background, lots of employer visits. There's been deepening collaboration with the All Age Service, with communities and labour market partnerships with representation. In terms of the actual adjustments that have been happening recently, we've agreed new quality standards with the wider providers within the careers ecosystem that we've talked about. We stood up a new trainee careers advisor pilot to ensure we've got the skills that we need. We strengthened links with some of our institutional partners, such as the Careers Development Institution, the Institution of Careers Counsellors in Ireland, NISCA. We've launched a Value in Careers campaign. We've had a significant amount of formal discovery work undertaken as part of the careers portal. Next month, we're hosting a roadshow in Sperrin School, where we're bringing together all the local careers partners to work out how we can support the different providers of careers. There's new test and learn pilots currently being established. We published international research on 17 different comparator countries. So that's just the past year, alongside the tens of thousands of people that have been supported. And I get that we want to see progress happening faster, more rapidly, but there is a careful balancing act between stepping up a major digital transformation project, taking forward an action plan, thinking about the improvements to the services all in the round.
Other members may pick up careers. There were a
Okay.
couple of other things I wanted to just, in that wider 14 to 19 piece. I mean, I'm not I'm not hearing real clarity around what has changed for a young person in the system now. There's a number of things in the mix in the 14 to 19 framework. So, I mean, has there been a review of the entitlement framework completed? Has that been done?
That's underway, yes.
It's underway.
So we've been looking at the information, and the aim of that is to look at, has the intent of the entitlement framework been achieved? So we have been looking at the data that we have, seeing how that has changed over time, what the trends are. ETI have also been helping us scoping out what they can provide in terms of that as well. But a really important piece of work that's going to feed into that is a curriculum review. These things are all interrelated, and some, as Linsey mentioned, the sequence.
Just to sort of to check, in 2022 that entitlement framework review is not complete. Has there been a review or even an establishment of a sixth form policy? Has that been developed as yet?
Again, that piece of work was started. We had done quite a lot of work on reviewing at the current position here, looking at examples of good practice in other areas.
So just to be, has that
been because
done?
Then we had to pause that work because the priority was around the careers. And as Clement said, we're working to try and keep ongoing delivery and then trying to do reform and review at the same time. But the priority was the careers, and that's what the Minister's asked us to focus on.
I do understand that tension, and we hear this in education all the time around special educational needs, that need to reform a really broken system but make sure that statutory responsibilities are still delivered on. We understand that tension. I think it is just the sense of how long these conversations have been running, I think, is the concern. Could I ask whether or not there's been any sort of review done around a policy statement being developed around the role of post-16 education in terms of the relationship between school and further education? Has that been finalised?
No. And again, the piece of work on the 16 to 18 is going to be critical in that. I think there is a good thing now in terms of timing, because we have this piece of work to do on sixth form, as we can move towards that. And then there's work to be done on FE in DFE. These things have to run alongside as well. With the sixth form policy, what we're aiming is just key questions about who should go to a sixth form, what should they do there, and where should they go next.
It's really fundamental to getting this right.
Yeah.
And it's concerning. I think 3 years in we haven't established that. If we don't know who is the target audience for sixth form and who's the target audience for further education, and are all young people with special educational needs served in both those pathways, I think if 3 years in we're not clear on that, it does impact confidence in where we're going in terms of getting this delivered. And
we have to get it right as well. So I'm going around at the moment meeting with all of the area learning communities, the principals in there, to talk about these were the issues that were raised. Have we properly understood what the issue is? Here are some potential ways forward. What do you think of these? Because we have to keep working alongside the people who are going to be delivering for us. And it's very easy for us to sit somewhere and go, so the issue with qualifications is the burden on learners. We can come up with a solution that would be, but it's no point in just implement it somewhere. We have to do that. So, and that takes...
Of course, these are complex things and complex relationships to manage. We do understand that. I think it is just when we're looking at the key core interaction between education and economy where they cross over, and it's hard to pin down delivery, and I think that's going to be a concern to anybody observing today.
If I could come in,
if you come in, yes, that's fine, because I wanted to take it on maybe to the legislative proposals because they link into this. But if you want to comment,
I think that point about alignment certainly across the education landscape's a really fundamental one. I'm not sure if anyone was at the Transform Ed conference last week. The point was consistently made by those international experts in the room that if we're going to achieve real impact for our children and young people, the need for alignment across that system and across those key strategic policy areas is critical. So the point around the curriculum reform piece being aligned to then assessment arrangements going forward, being aligned to qualifications and the qualifications reform agenda, these things need to move in parallel and together. So it might appear on the surface, if you're using a tick box,
it does.
In terms of what has happened. But this is really critical that these things are moving together. So to move ahead around a sixth form policy, to move ahead around the qualifications landscape in anticipation of a curriculum review, it isn't necessarily the way we need to go. But on the careers piece, I'm very conscious that our DFE colleagues were questioned around the careers service, but careers education and the role of careers teachers within the school is a really critical one, and there has been some important work done done in that regard with NISCA, for example?
Yes.
Karen, if you want to come in around that point.
Other members may want to pick up on careers. I just wanted to just take it to the next sort of issue that relates to it, and then I'll close my question because I'm conscious other members want to come in and we've lots to get through. We've got this proposal legislatively in relation to mandating training or education up to the age of 18, aligned with the independent review recommendations. Are we at risk of putting the cart before the horse here? If we're looking at this ecosystem, this 14 to 19 ecosystem, and there seems to be such a huge amount of work that needs to be done, if we legislate to say you've got to be in education or training to 18, but we don't have careers advice right, we don't have a sixth form policy right, we don't have a review of the entitlement framework, we haven't really addressed either post 16 SEN or post 19 SEN, both have their own separate challenges. Is there a risk that we'll legislate for something that's purely aspirational? Because for the young person in the system, what it says in the piece of legislation they must do is irrelevant if they don't have the right pathways and the right advice and the right framework for progression. So I would just like to hear your views on that, and then I will open up for other members.
Yes, Chair, that's certainly an issue that we're conscious of. If we were to progress legislation and enact it, but do nothing else, then that would be a risk. But I don't believe it is something, that's not how we intend to pursue this. There's a difference between enacting the legislation and commencing it. In England, it took a number of years between the legislation being enacted and the provisions around mandatory education or training until the age of 18 taking effect. I expect we will have a similar approach in Northern Ireland, and in that intervening period, we will take time to make sure that the pathways are in place and they are suitable for all of our learners.
I know the aspiration is to legislate in this mandate. I mean, if
Yes.
we're here in a year's time with a similar update as we have today, but will that legislation accomplish anything?
We would have the legislation provisions in place. We would commence those when we are when we have everything in place to make sure that works effectively.
You think that might be?
I expect it will be 5+ years.
We're really on a incredibly long-term piece of work here. This work that started in 2022, we're now saying 2030 before really any of this would take effect. Is that what we're saying? Where you would actually feel where we need to be? So 8 years after the entitlement framework.
If we can do it sooner than that, we will do it sooner than that. The challenge is making sure that the pathways are there. The alternative to that would be a fairly superficial provision where we have the legislation in place, but we haven't actually changed anything for our learners. If we don't get the pathways right, if we don't have the support in place, then I think that would be the wrong thing to do, Chair.
Chair, if I may as well, there is an existing youth guarantee, so all young people are guaranteed a place, and I appreciate this shifts some of the dynamics here. There's been a lot of work done recently to try and enhance the vocational pathway and simplify that, and there's been good progress made there. You can see the growth in other pathways like apprenticeships significantly over the last 4 or 5 years. So if you compare apprenticeships now to pre-COVID, there's around a 40% increase in participation. So I just want to challenge, I suppose, the sense that the pathways are broken and the careers advice isn't in place. If we look at those kind of over 20,000 people who have received support, around 90% of them are really satisfied with the support they receive, and I think that's been drawn out in some of the international studies as well.
And I think the issue is not that anybody would want to suggest there's no good careers advice and there are no good pathways for young people. I'm not trying to suggest that. It's whether all this is joined up in a 14 to 19 framework where all the relevant policy areas and all of those parts, the moving parts that need to come together, are actually in place, so that for that young person, wherever they are in the system, it's joined up, it's connected, and they're not relying on there being a good careers teacher in their school and that being a roll of the dice, that they're not relying on whether or not in their area there's an appropriate SEN provision for them, but in a postcode down the road there wouldn't be. So I think it is that those are the issues I think we'll be concerned about today. I'll close there because I've taken up more time probably than I should have done. I'm going to bring in the Chair of the Economy Committee, Philip, and then other members have indicated. If you could just continue to indicate through the clerk if you are looking to come in. Philip.
Thank you, Chair, and can I welcome colleagues here today, and I do preface my remarks with each and every one of you are dedicated public servants, and I know you're trying your best, but from my perspective we're in a wholly unacceptable situation. If we had been sitting here last year, the update that we're providing today is in my view no different from what we've received a year ago, and this isn't an attack on officials, particularly from the the economy committee perspective, who I have a really good, close working relationship with, I just don't think that there's the political focus on this issue that there has been on others, and that's why we're in the situation that we're at today, that I think expectation had been built up both by members of both committees, but also from the public who will be watching today's sitting, hoping for some useful updates for their young people, and they haven't really received any. In your opening statement, Moira, you rightly said that the departments had agreed on a small number of projects that they would take forward together. So I worry what would happen if there had been a large number of projects if we haven't achieved progress on these small ones. So in terms of the statement that the Minister is going to make in relation to post-19 SEN in June, what do we anticipate that that's going to say?
So first of all, I appreciate that these are challenging issues to talk about. They're really, really important to our ministers, really important to all of us. And I think the point about the small number was, and you know, if I may, and Linsey may have a view, when that framework was produced in 2022 and it had 34 actions, those actions, there was no resourcing plan that went alongside that. And those actions were, some of them were business as usual, some of them were really significant transformation. So one of the things that Linsey and I did when we started to work together was to look to say, we know that this way of working is not making the progress that we would like to see. So therefore we triggered a review to look into actually how could we do this better. And when Ministers Murphy, as it was then, and Given, was one of their very, very early meetings, was they said, clearly the progress, this way of working isn't working, we want you to focus in. So that's the backdrop to that, and we would completely accept that the way that things were operating was not going to drive progress, and we believe that the refresh that we've put in place, whereby ministers will agree a joint work plan and there will be a ministerial group with senior officials then tasked with taking those things forward, we think that way of working is going to be much more effective. On what you're referring to there as post-19 SEN, so we are now referring to that as the post-school SEN, because of the fact that actually with so many young people in mainstream education who have special educational needs, so we just wanted to make sure that we weren't ruling anybody out. So we've been doing a project on post-school SEN. Now we have produced a report. It's a hugely important piece of work, and the approach that we took was some desk-based research, very, very significant engagement with I think about 90 stakeholders, either individuals or groups, and also then a piece of research from Stranmillis University looking at comparative legislative frameworks. So that report has been presented to the Minister quite recently, and she is intending to make a statement soon. So I obviously couldn't prejudge what's going to be in the Minister's statement, but I can certainly share with you some of the things that came up through that work, and I don't think it'll be of any surprise to members. The issues that people were raising were around, in particular, consistency of approach, opportunities for their young people that were appropriate for the young person, but also I think that point about choice that came up time and time again, that young people would have choice, and that the young people who are statemented, those with special educational needs, would have equity in terms of the things that were open to them. And for those young people, there will be a range of different opportunities that are in line with their aspirations and what it is that they would like to do. And what we were hearing from all stakeholders, but particularly from parents and carers, was this sense that they were having to search out for themselves for those opportunities, and that in particular, not only that the opportunities weren't there, but that those transitions need to be improved. So the Minister obviously sees this as a really significant priority, and I think it's something that's shared because obviously this piece of work that's been ongoing in education as well. So when the Minister comes to make her statement, she will be summarising obviously what we have learned through this project, but also then pointing to the improvements that need to be made both within those elements of the system that economy is responsible for, And then I imagine that there will be a conversation that needs to happen across the executive, because not only are these issues that have responsibility and resonance within the Department for Education, but also really importantly within Department for Communities and Department for Health as well.
Okay. And given its importance to the Minister, how much then for the outworkings of this report and required recommendations has the Minister allocated in her departmental budget for this year?
There hasn't been an allocation as of yet for this year. We haven't worked that through.
So you're telling us that the Minister has it a priority, but she hasn't allocated a single penny to it. In terms of legislative,
I think just to respond, I think the official was looking to come back.
I just want to make sure that I'm being clear on this. So we have a small dedicated team to do this review work, and then when we're at the point of the Minister having considered and accepted those recommendations, that's when we would be working to ensure there would be a budget allocation associated.
In this financial year?
I would need to come back on the detail on that.
And then is there any legislative recommendations in the report in terms of primary legislation that would be required?
The Minister's considering the report, and when she's considered it and concluded, we'll be able to share that detail.
Okay, but all I was asking was in the report that has been produced to the Minister, and I assume paid for by the department given that Stranmillis University were involved in it. Are there any recommendations in that say that the Minister needs to bring forward legislation? The
report sets out a range of options that the Minister will now be considering.
Including legislation?
There are options that include administrative and legislative.
Good, thank you.
Chair. I will bring in the first indication that I have here, which is Sinead, who's online. Everything okay with you?
Thank you, Chair.
Great.
Thank you for all of the opening statements. I suppose I too share the frustrations that have been expressed by both chairs, and I do welcome the expressed ambition of more coherent and shared working between the two departments. But I'm really concerned about just how that manifests itself, particularly around careers advice, careers guidance and careers planning, and I don't really see how we have progressed. We know the problems, we have done many inquiries, and yet we're not moving forward in a more coherent way. So can I ask, has any consideration been given by the ministers to bring careers support into one department and one delivery mechanism within that department?
In terms of our draft proposals, it's certainly something that we've not recommended. It's not been part of that scope. We're focusing on the existing approved direction set out in 14 to 19, where there'll be better collaboration at every level. I think as has been set out in some of the introductory statements, there's agreement now at a ministerial level to have a joint ministerial group to oversee this. Then we have our official joint working. We then work jointly with our stakeholders. I think the way to tackle that is to ensure that at every level that we're cohesive and coherent. I mean, it's really tough to put careers in general into one place, because careers by its very nature is really diffuse through many institutions, settings, places, relationships. So in terms of the draft action plan that we have in place, it's very much focusing on recognising that reality, trying to consider how we can provide that singular picture of where all the different parts are, what they do, and thinking through how we can support that and support capacity in different parts of the system so that everybody's more enabled and more equipped and we're all pointing in the same direction. The other element of that, of course, is the careers portal, and ensuring that there's a really strong digital spine to back all of that up and to ensure that everybody knows how to access the support that they need, and that'll be through a range of mechanisms.
Just on that portal, are you working with AI? Are you developing that portal abreast with what is happening in the digital world?
Yeah, I mean, the digital world and the AI, we're just reflecting on this actually at a cross-sector stakeholder engagement event on Monday. It's moving so quickly. So where AI is at today is very different from where AI is at yesterday. So what we're trying to ensure is that this singular platform we built has got interoperability and agility built into it, so can adjust with the changes. One of the most pragmatic things that we can do around AI is ensure that our data is right. and I'm certainly not a data person, but I appreciate that we need to make sure that all of our data is structured for the portal, but that also will provide ancillary benefits in that that will allow other AI platforms to really use the information that we have and actually help others who are in the career system as well better use that information. We were discussing some of the potential of AI even in how we support users working through that portal. So they may be looking into initially, say, inspiration and understanding what opportunities are available, and the AI may then guide them, oh, have you thought about this program or this opportunity to get work experience? So there's lots of possibilities. We're currently, after a really detailed initial insight gathering and discovery process, we're currently doing what's called a pre-market engagement, and that's where we've effectively told the marketplace this is what our discovery process has told us, and we're receiving submissions from, I guess, a range of service providers and IT experts about what they can provide, and there might be some insight around AI on that side as well, Sinead.
Definitely evolving, and it's hard to get ahead of it, but it's really important that it's considered in the aspect of the portal itself. So obviously career planning is fundamental as well for the individual, and part of that is about work experience. Can you from the department's aspect, what work are you doing with the schools and with employers in order to develop a comprehensive and consistent and quality work experience for our young people?
Yes, is that okay? Yeah, thank you. Yeah, so work experience isn't a statutory requirement, but work-related learning is a really important part of a good careers offer to young people. All the research has highlighted that the main issues with it are the administrative requirements around employers trying to welcome for schools. So we've been trying to address that in terms of the insurance indemnity. And then it's the number and quality and timing of the opportunities, particularly for those learners that are there as well. So myself and Clem have actually been meeting with a number of people, organisations that kind of help to support that, particularly for those learners who are furthest from opportunity, and looking at how probably best through the portal, how there can be those connections. So if a school wants to know where to go, who in my area can help me, and it doesn't necessarily have to be work experience, because that can be challenging for a lot of companies, but visits into schools, or coming in and maybe helping deliver a lesson on something, or just setting a task kind of for a school to get that the engagement of employers into school. We've started it in the primary sector, because a lot of the research was saying to start careers provision earlier. And you may be aware of the Primary Futures piece of work that's been going on. We managed to there was pilots, very successful pilots run with a couple of primary schools. Then we got money from the Fair Start to extend that through the Drawing a Future. And now hopefully we're looking for additional funding to extend it even further across other schools as well. So we started in the primary. As I say, in the post-primary, we just looking at, as I say, looking with Clem at those opportunities for how we can work with them. And this pre-market engagement phase is really important, because it allows the people to say what's available. The biggest challenge, when we ask young people what they want, there's a list of things. It's those opportunities to get work-related experience. It's when you ask teachers, they want greater connections, the careers teachers and leaders, they want greater connections with employers. And there are some excellent examples of where that happens, at a local level and through the labour market partnerships and everything. Our issue is the lack of consistency and the challenge that there can be for some very small providers to do that. You could get somebody who they just don't have the capacity to take on somebody for a week, and maybe the timetable doesn't suit and everything, but they can make a contribution some other way. They might be willing to get
just running
engaged.
short of time on this inquiry, if we could bring that to a close.
So, Cara, I think on the discovery process,
to close,
Sinead, that was definitely something that came out as a key requirement from stakeholders. So we have work experience built into all of our vocational programmes, and I think the next challenge is to use those contacts and links with employers and have this be a clear product in the next stage and one of those phase 1 deliverables as well.
It's fundamental and it's really important, and we have made absolutely no progress in this in the last 10 years. So there's a great deal of frustration among parents, among school teachers and among employers who are willing and able to take pupils in, but there's barriers absolutely everywhere. It's something we need to overcome. Thank you.
Sinead. Emma, you'd indicated.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks to your apologies for having to cut out in the middle of your presentation. So I further apologies if something that I asked has already been covered throughout the bit that I missed. I wondered if you'd give an assessment, I suppose this is particularly for Department for Economy, of how capable the Economy Department is of meeting the skills as laid out in the skills barometer in terms of the needs of employers locally, and whether or not we're equipped to respond to that.
Yeah, I think there's been really good progress made in that area in terms of our skills governance. So whether it be in the FE sector with the work that they do around careers hubs, or in the 18 different sectoral partnerships that my division is responsible for, and effectively their ongoing conversations with employers, providers, sector experts around how we take the information that's coming through in the horizon scanning and translate that into what are the pathways we need and what is the curriculum content assessment that we need within that. So that's why you see apprenticeships growing in terms of the range of occupations, and some of the new occupations like cybersecurity that we've already talked about earlier today. I think the challenge probably comes around the number of people we actually need to undertake those offers. I think even if we were to have careers advice and supply and demand perfectly balanced within schools, we're still not going to have the amount of skills that we need for our economy to grow. And that takes you into the all-age piece, the SEM piece, thinking about how you support more complex transitions. So all-age apprenticeships was a really good step forward there as well. And I think it's around an 800% increase in the number of those over 25 who are doing an apprenticeship. And we're currently doing some challenge funds to work out challenge fund competitions to look at, well, how can we actually help more different types of people access those opportunities. So it's really about how we make some progress on, I suppose, that NEAT and SEND agenda and those who have been left behind, and that's for equity, social justice, but also productivity and meeting those requirements in the barometer.
So I'll maybe just come in and build on what Clem said. So we seek to respond to, anticipate what's in the skills barometer in terms of that curriculum offer, but also thinking about our skills council. So we have a skills council that advises the minister, and we've been very fortunate that members of that skills council have been really generous with their expertise and energy. So, for example, alongside all of this really important mainstream work that we're continuing to develop and build on, we've been producing through that skills council a number of more agile, I suppose, action plans. So, for example, we had one on digital skills, and we're due to launch one quite soon on green skills. So that idea that, along with the mainstream longer term piece, which we continue to build, we also have that ability to be agile, because we're very conscious that these future skills are here now. But also, really importantly, colleagues will be aware of the fact that we have a very, very tight labour market. So unemployment is incredibly low. However, we have 300,000 people here who are deemed to be economically inactive, and that's another one of the challenges that we need to look at. Obviously, the focus that we tend to have is that crossover with the 14 to 19, but we also need to think about those 300,000 people, many of whom would wish to work if the opportunities were correct, and that's where the collaboration, in particular with the Department for Communities, is also really important. So we need to look right across the whole vista, not only of our provision within the department and our delivery partners, but actually all of the executive departments where there's a really important overlap.
Yeah, so you've sort of brought me on to what my next question was about, which is really, I suppose, more focused to Department for Education. So if we look at the situation at the minute, is there enough incentive for schools to be directing children based on their ability, interest, future career aspirations into places in our, our further education colleges, as opposed to staying in courses at GCSE and A level that perhaps aren't actually going to benefit them long term, and where we see the rise in some schools of offering what you might call like vocational GCSEs and A levels, and where there's duplication then of what's been offered in a tech that's down the road. Is that ways going forward? Is that providing value for money, and is it providing the best outcomes if we're going to try and meet the skills of our employers? And we were talking earlier about I suppose on a very late basis at our earlier committee session around the Good Jobs Bill, and we can see the whole I suppose aspiration of the Minister with that is to increase productivity by increasing workers' rights and providing people with job satisfaction. And we know that the evidence tells us that when people are content and feel listened to at their work and feel that they have a voice and a say, they stay in their job longer, and they're more inclined to rise through their career. So taking that all on board, do we think there's enough tie-in between the two departments and ensuring that they're complementing each other?
Pick up on a few of the points there. So within schools, we offer the entitlement framework, which is a statutory requirement that a third of courses have to be on offer to learners, have to be general, a third have to be applied, and the additional, then the rest is dependent on the needs and aspirations of the young people. So there are a large number of those applied and vocational courses that are available on the list. It's called the NEEF-QUAN file. It's the approved qualifications that are approved for teaching for school children. Those aren't all delivered in a school. So a young person might be registered in a school, but they might be doing even part of it in the courses in an FE college. And they can do that from 14 because there are some pathways there to do that. And that's been really important to know, because there are lots of reasons, lots of factors that impact on that decision of where to go when you finish at school and where you're going next, whether you go into a FE college or something. That's why those connections early on are really important. There are some challenges with that, and but there are factors that influence. So that can be, it might just be about the accessibility of the FE college to the school, and whether those courses can be there.
We're just running short of time in this inquiry, so if there's any other of Emma's points you want to pick up to cover before we close.
Yeah, and then the issue about the duplication and whether things are being taught in the right place. There are a number of processes in place to make sure that learners are receiving the learning in the right place. There are some that have...
Is that considered then in terms of the business case for providing that vocational opportunity in the school, whether that's going to displace an FE college down the road? Yeah, well, if there are, as I say, there are several things in place. So that includes the awarding organisations that offer qualifications set out the requirements that are required for a centre to offer that. So that's the first check. Somebody will decide, the awarding organisation will decide, is that the appropriate place? Do you have the capacity and resources to deliver this qualification? Then it has to be, they have to be approved on the NEEF-QUAN file. And then there's a third process for large size qualifications, because the policy within schools is that we keep a broadly based and balanced curriculum. And there are some very large size qualifications that have the potential to narrow that. So there is a process that if a school wants to offer that in a school setting, they have to do and provide evidence of the due diligence that's been done to make sure, is that the right place that should be offered? Could they be going to an FE college? Has there been a discussion with the parents about it?
We are definitely out of time on this, and because I know, Linsey, you wanted to comment quickly, and then I'll have to draw this one.
And just building on what Karen said and picking up your point about the incentive for schools, I think the important contextual piece around this are the financial pressures in education. When you look at the trajectory of funding to support delivery of the entitlement framework over recent years, we have seen that steady and actually starkly declining. So whilst I'm not saying you need finance to incentivise collaboration between a school and a local FE college, there are some practical logistics that require finance, as in transport, particularly in those rural areas, to actually logistically get children or young people to the local FE college. And funding is a very critical factor in that regard. So schools will be making those judgments within the context of the budgets available to them, and we have seen that steady decline in terms of the funding to support that collaboration, which is a critical factor that we need to consider moving forward in terms of the review of the implementation of the entitlement framework.
Other members may pick these points up, but in terms of time I'll need to move on to the next member. So David, you'd indicated.
I might have missed it, but when will the three-year careers advice or action plan be published?
So it's currently with both ministers for consideration, and it probably, whilst it's got a lot of actions in it, are already underway, such as the collaboration with schools in local areas.
Just looking at it. Just looking at it. I understand.
Well, so the draft's currently with both sets of ministers. But the point I was going to make is that it probably goes beyond 3 years as well. It's there's a lot within 3 years, but beyond.
Well, I have 7 minutes, so I asked a really simple question. I just want a simple answer. I just want a date, and that's fine. I want to take on from Emma. Just take up from Emma on duplication. You talked about finance. So, what is the root cause of duplication and competition actually across the provision?
Well, I mean, I think the critical factor is we have 2 different funding models here across the 2 systems. So in education, schools are funded per pupil, and there's a different funding model, obviously, in the Department for the Economy in support of the FE colleges. But these are the factors that we need to consider in that review of the implementation of the entitlement framework that Karen talked about, because the whole intent behind that was that there would be that collaboration at a local level between schools and FE colleges. And I think we all have to be realistic. Just, Karen alluded to the complex range of factors that impact on these things happening on a local level. Often it can be parental choice. We know, and it's recognised in the 14 to 19 framework, that there continues to be issues in terms of the parity of esteem between education, those more
so the issue is finance, the issue is the funding between schools and FE.
I think it's one of the issues.
Can I add a little? As I say, I'm meeting up with principals in the ALCs at the moment and talking exactly about this and why this is happening. So funding is really important because of the cost of putting learners into FE, the cost and as I say, the reduction in the amount that we don't pay for it, we contribute to the cost of collaboration. So that's just a funding issue. But there are some issues, for example, and can I just preface this by saying we've also come across some excellent working relationships between FE and schools. As it always is, the issue is the variability. On occasion, some FE courses they will run if you have a minimum number of learners. But if you're a school who wants 6 learners to go there, but they're saying we'll only run it if you send 10, but this is going to be the charge for it, we have to address that issue. Back to funding again. But there's also the range of courses on offer, whether there are spaces left on those courses that are available.
I know all the issues.
Outcomes achieved by learners.
I appreciate the answers, right? This is frustrating, and the reason it's frustrating is there's a report 25 years ago that identifies all this, and nothing has happened. Nothing has happened. And I can list you loads of examples. I can tell you stories about loads of stuff. But what I'm fundamentally getting at, the root cause of this is money. That's the answer. Or you're telling me the answer. What's the duplication between the 2 departments then on the same issue?
So if I could just pick up a little bit, as Linsey was saying, yes, there's issues with the fact that we have 2 different systems and 2 different funding models, but also outside of the departments there are issues with perception and culture about, and the difference between some parents who are very, very keen for their young person to go through an academic route and the attractiveness or otherwise of FE, and that's something that we're working on, because our FE provision is vocational, technical, professional, and is very, very geared towards jobs. It's very geared towards a qualification that will take you into a vocational pathway. So there is a cultural piece as well as the financial piece, and I think that is important. And also when we look at young people, particularly in the last period, there is an increase of young people staying on at school rather than going to FE, but there's also an increase of young people going to higher education rather than a vocational course. So there are a range of issues here that come down to choice and behaviour. Duplication within the departments. I'm trying to think how I would describe. I don't think I could point to duplication within the two departments. But if there
isn't duplication between the two departments, so a child that between FE and between
sorry, in terms of that delivery, the delivery environment.
You're telling us there's no duplication between the two departments on kids' education coming through between that bit between 16 and 19.
Well, no, I don't think I could. Sorry, I thought you were talking about within our two departments. So in terms of that delivery environment, the schools and the FE colleges, I don't think we could say with absolute confidence that there isn't duplication there. I mean, this is one of the issues that the ministers have raised, which is we need to be really clear on not only where there might be either duplication or indeed underutilisation of capacity, particularly within the FE sector, but also, and to your earlier point actually about productivity, we know that fragmentation within a system is actually a productivity drag, and it's clear to us that there is fragmentation between these systems, and that's the thing that the ministers are really very, very focused on working through.
When you're saying you want to collaborate the work to move forward to deliver better for kids, who takes the lead in that? Where's the structure in that? Who reports to who?
Well, I think those are the structures we've described in terms of that joint ministerial group that both
you've talked about what you might do.
To.
You haven't told us what is there right now.
Well, I think underneath it, there's been strong collaborative structures. Yes, whenever Moira and I first got involved, yes, we took a look at that and decided, no, there's actually a different way of working. But I think there's been strong collaborative
Describe
groups.
that structure to us.
So,
who leads? Who does what?
Well, if you'd let me answer, sorry. So in terms of the work in the 14 to 19 framework, one of the important pieces within that, it's very clear within that framework that there's a wide range of actions that are actually for DE to lead under their core business. There's a number of actions for the Department for the Economy to lead under their core business, and then there's a smaller number of enabling actions that are actually very joint and collaborative in nature. So in terms of those very specific DE-led actions that we've already referred to some in terms of the review of the implementation entitlement framework, sixth form policy, etc., clearly the line of reporting is within the Department of Education around those. Similarly for colleagues around the Department for Education. But if we take careers as an example, there's been a very strong thematic careers working group set up that Clem and Karen are working hand in hand around. I'm very confident when you see that action plan that you will see the hands of both departments very clearly within that, and the reporting structure for that will be through that senior officials group and that ministerial group.
When will we see that action plan?
I mean, so there is a draft sitting there with two ministers. What I would say though is, in terms of there's like whenever we had the first draft of this, it neatly said which department was doing what stuff, and we actually took a conscious decision to move away from that, because that keeps us in line with a previous action plan, say, where here's what I'm going to do to improve the career service, here's what you're going to do to improve careers education, and we'll talk about what we're all doing. What we're trying to do in this action plan is establish system leadership, and that might mean there's a wee bit of mess around who's actually responsible, because, as I don't know who said earlier, it doesn't matter to a young person, so we've got to make sure that there's a shared and integrated leadership of this, and I think that's the big step change that has to be made, and that's probably why it took a bit more time to draft this, because it wasn't just your section and our section action plan.
When do we see delivery, simply? That's what I'm just asking for.
There's some delivery on the way. So tomorrow I'm with the Early Learning community talking about apprenticeships. Next month we've got our roadshow in Sperrin where all the different types of careers professionals are all together. So these things are happening, but there isn't going to be a light switch. It's about developing the muscle, as you would say, more around our governance, our engagement and delivery on the ground.
Draw it to a close there. Just as a maybe connected to that, is there any appetite, sort of even between the two ministers, around looking at the recommendation for the independent review, which said, we need to actually have a Department of Education, Skills, Learning, so that the policy agenda is coherent through both departments, rather than this sense of having to find ways to almost work around the barriers to collaboration. I mean, the Children's Services Cooperation Act hasn't had a mention, but absolutely would mandate your departments to be delivering on this work. Is there appetite around looking at, are these structures between the two departments fit for purpose?
Well, certainly the recommendation in the independent review of education was for a single department on that, and that's a matter for the executive to consider, and the Minister very much took that view that that's not something that was in his bailiwick. So if the executive decides it wishes to restructure it, then that's a matter for the executive. What the Minister did take the view on, and I suspect it's shared, is that structures and organisational boundaries should not inhibit the right thing for young people, and we need to make sure that those structures are actually suitable and drive us forward in the right direction. And the structures that Moira and Linsey had referred to today, should be getting us to the point where things are taken forward in a joint and cohesive way.
Really just wanted to raise that point of the two departments. I don't want to take up other members' time. Diana, you'd indicate it next.
And thank you to the panel for coming in today. And I share the joint committee's frustration. I listen to industry, I talk to employers, and how do you give them confidence if they're watching today and they're looking at, and they're faced with the skills gap, that they're questioning whether they should invest, whether they should remain here to invest? What confidence can you give them today that you have this plan, this pathway will be in place? You mentioned 5 years, that it's all in place, but for an employer, they can't afford to wait 5 years. How do you respond to that?
Can I check, just Chair, on the question that's specifically around the 16 to 18 legislation?
For their investments going forward, their growth plans going forward, that there is the pipeline of skills coming through.
Well, I can certainly pick that up from an education perspective. We hear those same frustrations coming from employers around their skills shortages and that skills gap in particular areas. And that is an area we work very closely with DFE colleagues around. But I think for those employers and industry, they will have seen over recent years a much closer engagement with the Department of Education in that conversation than they may have had previously. I think if we're all honest here, previous conversations around skills and employers have largely sat with the Department for the Economy, when we all know the pipeline for those skills starts in schools. So just to give you an example around the curriculum review that was recently established, employers and industry have had a very clear voice into that process, to Lucy Crean, who's been taking forward that work, making those arguments very clearly around skills, around the gaps and around the shortages. They have been working with us, for example, through the work being led by CCEA around digital skills. But again, the solutions to some of these issues, particular to schools and education, are complex because there are issues around the curriculum, what is taught, qualifications in terms of those pathways, and then actually teacher shortage in some of these key areas as well. So I would like to think that employers will take great heart from the recent publication of the Minister's Transform Ed strategy, and again that's very particular to schools and to education, but in terms of the curriculum review which will be published in the coming weeks around the plans for qualifications reform, and indeed around the commitments around workforce planning in the teaching workforce, that those skills gaps and those skills shortages will be a matter of consideration within the context of all of those, so that we will be alive to the needs of employers. But the reality is, in terms of that longer term pipeline, the solutions aren't short term. And there is a much more systemic response required, particularly around issues like digital skills. But that's particular from a DE perspective.
And I could maybe add to that. So one of the things that's been really beneficial for us as part of this joint working is that Linsey sits on the Skills Council, and that has been really significant, not only in terms of Linsey sharing her expertise and being able to add to the discussion, but I think even symbolically the Department for Education has a place at that table. And then we now have an education subgroup of the Skills Council. So we're within our bailiwick, clearly we're hand in glove with employers and industry and all of the sectors within Northern Ireland, particularly through the sectoral partnerships that work with us on our vocational pathways. But I think at that strategic level as well, the fact that we now have that very, very clear joint working and education having a seat at that table, I think is really important, and we need just to continue to build on that.
And just to augment that briefly, Chair, the comment around the 5 years or the 5-year time frame around was specific to the legislation around what we refer to as 16 to 18, so mandating or requiring remaining in education training in some shape or form until the age of 18. That 5-year time frame, if we can bring that forward, that would be great. It's really 2 years we're looking at to progress the legislation through, and then a period of time to develop the arrangements and embed those in place across not just schools, the wider education system, including FE, but also working with our employers to consider the impact on them and the arrangements that they need to have in place as well. And again, that is not just a commitment to our young people in terms of investment in our young people, but it's also about then investing in our economy as well and developing the skills through the further investment in our young people.
Padraig, you'd indicated next.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Just checking you can hear me okay, yeah?
Yes, audio's grand, yeah.
Okay. Look, thanks very much for the responses, and I suppose you've engaged on quite a number of topics. So for me, really, I just want to touch on, obviously, you'll be aware that we passed an Assembly motion recently on the per pupil funding model, which we recognised as a key barrier to students moving into FE, because schools are, I suppose, compelled then to try and retain students to avoid a drop in their funding and a drop in their resources. So could we get an update from the Department of Education primarily around what has happened since that motion? What are the plans around that, and how can you ensure that this action, which is a key enabler for everything else, I think, around careers, can be driven forward? Thanks.
I think, Padraig, we have to look at the underpinning reasons that things happen if we're going to address it. So, as you say, the per funding pupil model, sustainable schools policy have been put forward as reasons for sixth forms hanging on to learners. But as I said, the pattern that exists at the moment has been pretty consistent for many years. So at that stage, at end of year 12, we get around 64% of learners decide to stay in school. And at that point, and what can happen is the absolute numbers can change because of just changing demographics. And that's what we've seen recently. At the moment, we're seeing more higher numbers will be going to FE because there's a larger population of young people that age, but the proportion stays pretty consistent over time. And when you look at that, and as I say, there is also that issue that it might not be that they're not going to FE, they might be doing it in collaboration they might be enrolled in a school because they want to do more than the offer that's in the FE. They want to take 3 subjects, one of which might be offered in FE. So they might be still going to FE and experiencing that, but not enrolled there, because of they're enrolled in school. But it's the factors that impact on that, and we've already touched on the accessibility of settings for young people, if they're near to somewhere or not, and how can we support them to do that. The parental and pupil preference as to where they want to go. It's like, how do we get lots of information to them about what's on offer? And so that's why it's really important that the careers advisors who offer that impartial and independent advice go into schools and make sure they're aware. We know that the FE colleges do come into the schools and they show to show what's available. We've also increased the amount of information that's going into school, thanks to the Careers Occupational Information Unit. More information is going, and they have some excellent information and bulletins about what's available, what you need to make progress, what your progression pathway might look like. So that's actually being put in place, so there's greater information sharing.
I suppose just from my end, I appreciate all that and totally take that on board, but it's just specifically around the per pupil funding model to see what review the department are going to do on that, and I appreciate all that. I'm going to come back to the careers just in my next question as well, just around that, but it's specifically just on the per pupil funding model. What are the department doing to review that, to change that, to look at that?
Patrick, there's a lot of internal discussions within the department at the minute in the context of the overall reform agenda that the Minister recently produced in terms of Transform Ed. So we would need to come back to the committee at a future date when thinking's more advanced around that.
Okay. Okay, I'll maybe jump onto the career stuff and come back to that as well. And look, I appreciate the two answers on it. It's just obviously because there was support across the Assembly, it's something that people recognise as a barrier, and we've heard as a barrier from schools, from FE colleges, from pupils. So it would be really welcome update on that. In terms of the career service, then providing information and opportunities across Ireland. What information currently exists on that about All Ireland opportunities? And I suppose then to further that, what support is given to students who wish to study in the South or vice versa to support them on that journey?
Yeah, I suppose it's a pretty pragmatic approach where the careers advisors are expert in supporting people in their communities. So where there's a stronger need, then that obviously plays a much stronger role in their advice, and there's a lot of on-the-ground collaboration between careers advisors and careers counsellors north and south. There's also deepening strategic collaboration with the Institute of Careers Counsellors as well. So I certainly think within the action plan, we referenced the need to ensure that all learners are aware of the full range of opportunities, and that involves understanding how their pathways, their qualifications are portable across a number of different jurisdictions. So at the moment, it's very on the ground, informal, good relationships. There's deepening strategic relationships, and then it forms part of the draft action plan as it's currently drafted.
Could I just add something to that, if that's okay? One of the things that's going to make a difference is this change in the university admissions process. I mean, it used to be that our learners from here needed to have 4 A-levels in order to be able to get the sufficient points, whereas that has now changed, and the requirement is it's 3 A-levels plus either an AS level, or an extended project, and that's really important, because if you look at the pattern that we have, we get 80% of young people who do the 4 AS levels drop to 3 A levels. So this is massive. There's like, you're talking very few low hundreds who take 4 A levels. So this is a huge opportunity if that's what it's going to be. That information was shared with us. It's been shared widely with the careers teachers and career service have all of that information, of course. And I know that organisation as well, CCEA, make presentations at the NISCA conference so that the careers teachers are aware of it, directly, and have the opportunity to discuss it. So
just to say on that, so in terms of one of our focuses is making sure there's much clearer information around people from the north who may wish to go and study in the south. So the NI Direct website has been updated, is now much more helpful in terms of those pathways, what's needed. I know there's some work with the career service on some bulletins to go out and just make sure that information and guidance is really there for young people.
Okay, so thanks.
I could just for
your answers.
Just briefly for any final question.
No bother. Look, I thought that was really useful, and I think it's good to see that progress, because it's something that obviously needs to happen. My last question is just related, and it's just around the apprenticeships piece. I think it was mentioned earlier as well, and placements as well. There are obviously a number of bureaucratic barriers for students who are from the north wishing to complete an apprenticeship or a placement in the south, and vice versa as well. So obviously quite a complex issue, but for students like in my region, people who are coming from Donegal and to Northwest Regional College, and similarly in your end from and other areas, how can they complete placements either north to south or south to north, and what work's being done between yourselves and counterparts in the south on that?
very, very short on time on this one. If we could just try and answer that last question as briefly as possible.
Well, I think initially I'd be really grateful if we can share any instances of where that's causing a barrier. We recently met with the senior management team, equivalent across our skills and education group of colleagues in the South, and there was really a shared commitment to ensure that whenever we add up our respective funding policies that there weren't any gaps. I certainly don't receive a lot of direct intelligence about there being gaps, and where there are all Ireland bodies like County Technicians Ireland, we work to ensure that there's portability across. But that's certainly something that is part of the definition of an apprenticeship, that it is portable. So really keen if there's any further examples that you share them with us.
Yeah, thanks. It's just for clarification, Chair. It's just really particularly the vocational ones. So the likes of your mechanical engineering, electrical engineering, so on, joinery, plumbing, stuff like that people are out and about a lot, and it's that kind of qualification that people are less willing to take them on, sometimes because of taxation barriers, sometimes because of bureaucratic ones. But I'm happy to take that offline and discuss in detail. Thanks for your responses. That's really useful today. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Padraig. Perhaps if officials reach out to Padraig directly on that specific point, and obviously the Economy Committee can pick some of that up if needs be. Thank members for their patience. Obviously it's a bigger committee and we're all waiting patiently. So Gary, I'm going to bring you in next.
Yep. Thanks, Chair, and thanks to all of you for your presentations. Very useful. A couple of questions for me. Apologies if I've missed it. In terms of the careers portal piece, and I recognise it's an ongoing piece of work, is there a sort of time frame as to when you expect that piece of work to be completed? I don't know if I picked that up yet.
Yeah, so I think it was said earlier on that we kicked this work off, I think it was maybe 2013.
Yes.
In terms of the actual project, it's probably early 2024. So in the first half of 24, it was pre-project phase of insight gathering and engagement, and there was a lot of work done there. A network established across all our jurisdictions, a wide range of focus groups, 11 workshops, lots of direct in detail interviews, a couple of cross-cutting stakeholder engagement events, and a widespread survey. After that, we then did a strategic outline case with a business case for discovery process formally. I mean, this is a big piece of work, so it's important we go about it in the right way. So in the last 6 to 9 months, we've largely completed that discovery process. So 11 workshops, over 190 attendees, then another cross-sector validation event last week. And then earlier in May, we launched a pre-market engagement exercise to see, well, what can the market actually provide? We're currently finalising that discovery report, and then a number of things need to happen in June, and we add together the benchmarking work, the discovery work, the pre-market engagement into a business case. It's going to set direction on what are our commercial approaches, what's going to actually be in the portal, what's going to be in phase 1. And we're planning to go out for some form of commercial exercise in the autumn. This is a big piece of work, but we want to make progress with it. So our current plan is that we would have a phase 1 deliverable between sort of September to December 2026. Now, there are a lot of uncertainties there, and that a requirement, the portal is a piece of technology, but to kind of speak to a lot of the committee's concerns, in the background, the bigger challenge is ensuring that all of the careers offers are all joined up nicely together so it can be presented. Mm-hmm. So we've got collaboration, we've got IT development, and we've got commercial procurement. So there's a lot of things to happen. So that's our current plan, and we're happy to keep you updated as that progresses.
No, please do, and I'm glad I asked the question because it gave you the opportunity to say about some of the things.
I hadn't said that yet, so thank you.
that were been done. So look, we'll keep a watching brief. There's no point in terms of labouring that point, but it's important to get that out there. Another point, last week at the Economy Committee, we had a briefing, I don't know if you've seen it, just in terms of work placements experience. Some of the schools were in, Speakers for Schools was in as well. They did highlight a number of concerns, particularly around some of the challenges faced by businesses in terms of completing paperwork, etc. Some of them just don't have the capacity or the time to do it, but they're willing to help. One of the things that was mentioned in 2022 in the report was the idea of a central work experience database. Is that been taken alongside? Has that been taken forward first of all, or is it part of the portal piece? I just think it would be useful in terms of bringing that work together.
One of the things, I mean, and Clement have been discussing this because work-related learning is such an important part of what good provision looks like. And as I say, there's a range of what employers can offer. And what we're saying is, and we have spoken to Speakers for Schools and Catalyst and, you know, a number of providers who I'm sure will be putting information into the pre-market engagement about what can be put on offer, because that's what would be so useful. If there was a place where employers who were willing to engage could record and say what they're willing to do, you know, so it might not be a week's placement, but there might be something, and it's getting that range of things that they can engage in to offer that kind of work experience. But there's lots of other ways employers can support schools and help direct things. So employers being on board of governors, it would be a really helpful thing, you know, that kind of offering things in your local area. But as I say, yeah, we've talked about how we can bring that all into the portal to help the schools, because they don't know where to go. And if you're that careers education teacher, you know, if you know where to go, signposting is so important.
One of the key values, if you like, of the portal is around equity and ensuring that it doesn't really matter who you are, where you live, who you know, that you can understand how you can access opportunity. Work experience is such an important part of that, and it's certainly one of the key discovery findings in terms of this is one of the tools that we need. So I suppose within that business plan there'll be a number of sub-products that need to be developed as part of what goes into that phase one basket, if you will. And I think that's the place really to try and address this in the round.
Those organisations like Speakers for Schools are particularly targeting those furthest from opportunity.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And just a very, very final, and it's a very short answer, because Moira, you had given the update to Philip kindly in terms of the post-schools 19 stuff. Obviously, I'm not going to push you any further in terms of it's the Minister's call now at this point. In terms of bringing that forward, you said soon. In terms of roughly, like I'm assuming you mean when we say soon in Northern Ireland, it could be next year. But do you mean in terms of hopefully in the next couple of weeks? Are we talking June?
So the Minister, the Minister is very, very committed to making progress in this important area, and it's important for everybody. And the report was, and it's a very hefty piece of work, was given to her very recently. We've had a discussion with her on it, and I know that she is keen that progress would be made in the next few weeks. So soon in this case, I think, is at this end of the spectrum in terms of speed.
Thanks very much. Thanks, Chair.
Gary. Weeks rather than months is welcome on that. Really briefly, just to pick up on the points around work experience connected to Gary's final question, is there work ongoing to ensure that we're facilitating work experience placements for young people with SEN, particularly with learning disabilities? Is that something that is live? I know when we had Alma White presenting at our education committee a while back, she threw down a bit of a challenge in terms of that issue to members directly, actually. But I think just departmentally, is there anything happening in that space?
From a careers portal perspective, this was something that was discussed quite a lot during discovery about whether this is something separate or whether it's integral, and where things landed in terms of the final report is this has to be a consideration in terms of every single one of the products that are developed. So it's not something separate, but something that is integral. So when we're talking about those phase one products, that has to be a consideration for every one of them.
And if I could just add to that, so one of the programmes that we ran last year, it's called Step Up, and within that programme, a number of our young people from special schools did work placements within, in particular, Stranmillis University College, and I think that was something that was tremendously positive and beneficial, not only for those young people, but actually for the staff within Stranmillis. It was really, really positive, and we've so much good learning from that. And I think we would all be in agreement that the challenge that Alma's putting down there is an extremely fair one, and one that needs to be picked up and followed through on.
Next indication, it's Peter.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thank you for your evidence this afternoon. Firstly, just a bit of a comment really on the evidence. A lot of it that I saw was a little bit historic for me. So the Northern Ireland Skills Barometer that was concluded was 2021. The performance data from DFE was 21-22. and there was a chart on technical vocational education from 2017. Are any of those, is there nothing more updated than that? Because it makes it quite difficult to draw, either see direction of travel from data that I would just imagine. I'm aware that Skills Barometer recalibrated, yes, and there's one for 23 to 33. Was that included in the evidence?
I would have to check.
Good committee member always knows the answer before he asks an official question. So I think that would have been useful to have in there. It's more of a general comment that actually in this area, because this is quite fast changing as well, that I think stuff that's maybe what I would call in this area historic from 4 years ago, it's kind of just, it's quite difficult then to see direction to travel, but that's more of a general comment just about the evidence. More if I could just start with you, just following up from my two colleagues' questions on the post-school SEN. Clearly there could be something coming in June. You indicated in the evidence that it's likely to be, there's an executive paper will follow that, and that's because it's cross-cutting, cross-departmental. Can I check just a technical point with you in terms of the Department of Economy? It's my understanding that the Department of Economy has the varies to bring this forward. Does the varies lie with the department to bring legislation forward rather than any other department?
So the Department for Economy would have varies around skills and training, and I think that's so. It's one of the things that we will need to look at, which is to make sure that we are taking forward those things that we are responsible for. I think that the technical point about the extent to which those varies are flexible or expansive, I think that would be one for the lawyers that we would need to look into. But certainly, as far as our provisions concerned, that's something that the Minister's been very clear that she's committed to improving.
Okay, and we're going to stay with that one for a second then. Would your evidence be that you are not sure if the Department for Economy has the varies on that, and has the Minister not yet sought either DSO or Attorney General advice around that?
So my evidence would be that the Minister has been presented with a range of options on special educational needs post-school. The Minister needs to consider those options, decide what it is that she would like to take forward, and at that point we would be bottoming out all of the elements around the pathway that the Minister wishes to take.
Okay, I might go for round three then. It would be surprising to me, let me put it in that context, that the Minister, in undertaking this significant piece of work, having commissioned Trimmel's College to look at a range of legislative options and positions around the UK, has not yet approached DSO or the Attorney General to find out if her department is the one responsible for taking forward the legislation, because that can be done at any time. It doesn't need to go to the executive for that.
Well, I think it would depend on what the content of that legislation would be. So I accept that you're surprised by that. This is a piece of work that's been done through very significant engagement with stakeholders and desktop review, setting out a range of options for the Minister to make the improvements that she wishes to see within those responsibilities that are the Department for the Economy. And that's one of the challenges actually within this really important area of work, which is when we look further afield, particularly across the water, local authorities have responsibility for the full remit of housing and transport and education and health and all of those things. So it's actually a much easier, in some ways, legislative or administrative process, because a local authority has all of those responsibilities, whereas our modality is that those responsibilities are across a whole range, not only of departments but other organisations and systems as well.
You know, I understand that, and I don't underestimate the size of the work or the significance of it, and it is really, really important. So it would certainly be my understanding, having had a bit of experience in education, that there is, and we've talked about it today, there needs to be significant changes to the careers service, careers advisory service, and so on. And I think it would be a brave committee member or even official who would say, it's all perfect, it's working really well, this is absolutely super, let's keep doing this. I suppose my question, and it's probably for DFE more than anyone else, is we have 2 years of the mandate left. Just briefly, what changes are we likely to see by the end of the mandate? So if I said 2 years, next 2027, what changes to the Careers Advisory Service or the Career Service would we see in the next 2 years?
So, but like Moira's point earlier, there is a draft plan, and I can't go into too much detail and second guess changes that may be made to that. I mean, some of this is a volume game. So last week, very timely, we had the Matrix International Quality Standard around our career service. It's been internationally benchmarked. Return on investment figures are good. Experience is good. But other services have got 2 to 4 times the money that we have. So if you've got double the amount of advisors, it moves from being a singular interaction into being a number, and people feel more supported. So I think that there's a lot of people there who are expert and doing a really good job, and it's important to make that point. But in terms of the experience and the needs that are out there, the review was clear that with this current level of resource, it's really hard for us to meet the growing needs that are out there, and that's why we're into collaboration. So I think the biggest change that will be made is 2 big changes. One is that if we were to have a singular page in front of us that shows us the careers ecosystem, where we can all understand who does what, and they understand the different parts, how they're supported. I think that's one thing, and then it's a bit by bit process to making that so. We all know what direction we're heading in then. And then I think the other thing is that if we do have that portal, that digital place where people who maybe don't have Apache support, well, they know actually I can go to this place and I understand how I can access the support that I need.
Okay. Could I just add one little thing to that? And please forgive me, but none of us are complacent about any of the things that are on our desks, and we want to do our absolute best. No, 100%. But so on the piece about the career service, I just think it's really important to say that we've independent research that has concluded that our career service punches above its weight in terms of international comparators. So I just, Clem is maybe too modest to make that point, but the team, particularly the careers advisors, they've been internationally benchmarked as punching above their weight, and I just think it's important for us to make that point.
No, I understand that.
Yeah, and just very briefly, for
just short on time. I mean, certainly, you said there, Clem, it's a volume game. I accept that. More bodies on the ground means, it could be put forward. That's a job for your minister at an executive level, bidding for funding. Don't respond to that, because I've only got one question left. Page 14 of the independent review cites, and this is one for my education officials, challenges working with health. And under that section, it cites sort of some of the difficulties with that in the context of early needs, early intervention. My question really is, what level of working is there between education and health at that really early year setting? And is there any level of accountability? I'm not going to ask you the question today, but do we know, does education know, is health visiting happening? Because that's a really important bit. You guys get the kids whenever they're 4 and 5 and take them all the way up and then hand them over to economies degree. That's a crucial bit. Is there good engagement between education and health, particularly in 0 to 2? And what level is that engagement at, and how often does it happen?
I could just come in, we're taking us, it's a really, really important point, but it's taken us slightly away from the agenda of today. So
on the evidence, Chair?
Very, very happy to hear a response. Time is short on it, so it would have to be a brief response, but I appreciate that.
And perhaps I can give a more detailed response in writing.
That'd be great.
But just to answer it very quickly, there's significant engagement through the early learning and childcare work between our departments, but also in terms of, as you would know, around the special educational needs reform agenda, where we have a jointly chaired health and education oversight group. There's certainly more work to be done. We know around the importance of those early years, but there's good and significant and frequent engagement ongoing, but I can get back to you in more detail around.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Peter. I wanted to pick up just on a very practical point, that matrix benchmark that you referred to there on the careers advice. Was there a reason that wasn't shared with us in advance? Because that would have been really helpful to see.
I think it was last week. It was last week.
Okay. Is that something that can be shared with the respective committees?
Yeah, I'm sure it can. It's an international accreditation. It's a very rigorous approach to award it. I think the Career Service has received it on an ongoing basis since 2013, every 3 years maybe.
Be helpful to see any more detail on that. And really just a point rather than a question, I think from Peter's questioning there, that there will be some concern, I think, arising around the phrase, that post-school saying piece. On the one hand, I really welcome that you used the phrase post-school at the outset, because we do have the issue in mainstream school of young people at 16 who don't have a pathway open. But it does start to then bring into play that tension between the two departments. And I would just want to put on record, I think, and I hope I can speak on behalf of both committees, I don't think either committee would want to see this becoming a point of tension between the departments as who takes this forward. I think everyone's clear we need to make progress on this. I think across the parties we're clear that we do need legislation, and I wouldn't want around an argument around who has responsibility or complexity. You referred to local authorities. The executive does have responsibility for this, so as an executive we need to deliver on this, and I think very clearly Children's Services Cooperation Act, again, very, very clear. There's been no reference made to that. The departments are required to do this. You have to act in the best interests of the child. So I don't think that we would really just not want to see that become a point of conflict. And I would leave that as a comment, unless you want to very briefly respond. But
I think I can speak for both of us and both departments in that we are absolutely on the same page around being completely committed. Our ministers are completely committed to improving the opportunities for all our young people, and particularly those that haven't had the same opportunities to date.
And it's welcome to hear that clarification. I'm aware of contributions on the education side from the Minister in the Chamber saying this is not for me, this is economy. So I really just don't want to see us getting into that space. So I'll leave it at that. I only have one other indication, so if anybody else who hasn't indicated wants to, please, now's your opportunity. But Michelle is the last one I have, so if there's anyone else, and then we'll bring David in. Michelle, do you want to?
Me now, straight away. Well, I had one in there. No, I've been listening the whole way through this. Obviously, I wasn't here for the last committee, so I'm going to try to pick up things people haven't covered as much as possible, which is going to be hard at this stage. There was something in your in the briefing around interactive career solution that had tested as a system around supporting young people with autism. I would love to get a wee update on that project if you have one.
Yeah, so really it's an SBRI project, a successful one that tested innovative approaches, and I suppose it was trying to give the careers advisor a tool to engage with young people with autism around what their interests are and how those can be translated into what are the opportunities that are out there, and the different pathways that are available. We started with autism. I think 1 in 20 young people have that diagnosis. We're currently doing the pre-market engagement, or recently completed it, and the plan is to start having a rolling introduction of that as a tool that's available for all careers advisors in the autumn. So I think that's a really important strand of work, and initially it's for that group of young people, but then it can be expanded into, well, what are the other barriers that people face to ensure that everybody's able to receive the advice that they need, and there aren't any barriers in the way of that.
Was getting kind of tailored support for people with
conditions.
That sounds really good. You've had a lot of bad cops today, but that was a nice positive one. That sounds good.
I'm nodding very vigorously because I have a young person that had the support from the career service and the transition, and I know how. I just know how much the careers advisors and colleagues within the Education Authority have cared for my young person, and I think this is testament to how we're seeking to move that on to the next level.
Apologies if this has been covered because it's been a long session, but there was some concern about actual staff and staff shortages. Are you making progress on that?
On the career service side? Yeah, I mean that is a challenge, and it is one where we have we're about a year into an apprenticeship style trainee pilot, where people come without the professional qualification and then they gain it whilst they're developing on the job. So that blend of on the job and off the job experience. So, and I think we're really delighted as being a group and department responsible for apprenticeships to actually have some provision. We're really happy with how that's going. We're keen to step that up. I think it's just that careful balance of resources, because all new colleagues need a lot of on-the-job support as well initially. We've also got a permanent. We've also got a standard competition out at the moment as well. Yeah. I think the main solution though has to be that apprenticeship style model as we go forward and trying to step that up.
Yeah, I mean, you can't deliver any of this without people, so yeah. No, that's really important. I'm not going to. Thankfully, I was worried about we hadn't covered the post-1910 stuff, but I'm going to, Peter, you're very good in coming in with all the questions that I had there, but I want to be really clear. We've talked around legislation and VRAs, etc. Are we getting legislation? I think that's the question that Alma and others will want answered. Are we expecting to get an announcement around legislation?
So the Minister met with Alma and Denise, obviously from Caleb's cause, either last week or the week before, and she was very clear that she is open to all of the options here, and those options include, obviously, as we talked about previously, legislation. So I wouldn't be in a position today to give you a firm commitment on that in advance of the Minister taking her decision, but she was very clear that she is open to looking at the evidence and making her decision on the basis of that.
From our perspective, there's a very clear expectation that would be the solution that would be the most effective. So hopefully that will be a positive outcome on that front when the announcement comes. As we're kind of wrapping up here, I guess to go to the 14 to 19 framework and just kind of, there's been a lot of commentary about what's going to be delivered and feeling that there's a lack of clarity today on actual deliverables. So I guess the first thing for me is reading through the evidence and what we've discussed even previously in the Education Committee. There's that terrible, dreadful Gateway review, which raised a lot of concerns around governance and on lack of clarity around objectives. Can we be clear today, leaving this session, that those things have been overcome?
So, first of all, I think it's important to say that Linsey and I commissioned that Gateway. Mm-hmm. So we commissioned that Gateway because we knew that the structures that we had in place were not as effective as they needed to be. So we knew that and brought in independent experts to give us the drill down into how things needed to change. And I'm really heartened, and I think Linsey and I have talked about this a lot. We were really heartened then that when the Gateway review team came back, we were upgraded from red, which is obviously where you do not wish to be, up to amber. So we are on that positive trajectory, and we are really confident that particularly where we have ministerial leadership and two ministers sitting together agreeing a work plan, and then no doubt we'll be back to another joint committee at a point in the future to talk about that work plan, and we look forward to having something there that is much more. I mean, this is the thing. I think the framework was very ambitious. It had 34 actions, and we've talked about some of the maybe challenges around that. So while we're very ambitious about the level of collaboration and delivery that we wish to see, we also have to be pragmatic and to manage that alongside the ministerials, the separate ministers, their own priorities within a much broader spectrum of responsibility, and those things that clearly will be delivered in joint.
I mean, the only way is up from red, really. Do you know what I mean?
Aye, and sure, we're in amber now, like, so we're.
But just, I know my time will run out quickly here, but just in that vein, you're providing some level of assurance that you've obviously taken some steps to improve that. In terms then of what will be delivered, if we come back here in a year's time, what specifically can you say to us will be able to update you on X, Y, and Z that has been delivered within the next 12 months?
If I could just build on what Moira has already said, well, firstly, just to totally concur with everything she has said, and I think we're in a much better place now in terms of those structures and the relationships and I suppose that enabling infrastructure. But I think there's one other benefit to all of this, and that has been that we're now in a place where we're much clearer in terms of that wider strategic landscape, because I think another issue that was perhaps muddying the waters around 14 to 19 was the range of other big strategic pieces happening in the environment, around the independent review of education, for example, a lot of changes in the skills landscape. We now have the benefit of greater clarity around that. From an education perspective, the Minister's recent publication of Transform Ed. So I think when we look at the joint priorities that will be agreed by our ministers, it will be very much in the context of that very clear prioritisation for the remainder of the mandate. From an education perspective, I think this will have to be read alongside the implementation and delivery plan for Transform Ed, for example, that does set out very clear timelines around curriculum, around the review of qualifications, that are all very consistent and relevant to what's in 14 to 19. So the next time, if we're here in a year from now, I think we'll be able to give a very clear update around what has happened around curriculum, around teacher professional learning. That's a clear theme within 14 to 19, and around that qualifications landscape. So this really will have to be read alongside that implementation plan, because there are key deliverable and target dates within that. But that's very particular to those areas. Yeah. You know, that will be very much in the education lead.
I think as the career side has been prioritised within 14 to 19, you know, the four main areas that are certainly kind of draft at high level will be that clear articulation of what the system is and how the different parts will be supported, a wider sense of who will be supported, starting earlier and stronger all age and those who have more complex transitions, a look at new delivery models, and there's already test and learn pilots underway. And then finally, the digital tools. So those are the four main areas, but obviously there's a lot of specifics that we need to get approved.
Do we have clear measures of success around all of this? What success looks like? Have we articulated those, and are they?
So at the moment, we do have we do have our existing approaches for measuring success. But if we were to define, say, a new framework of what good looks like in terms of a school environment, then we need to look at those and adapt those alongside.
We're necessarily clear on that, on exactly those measurables, but I mean, I think that there is definitely appetite there for another forum like this to be convened. So hopefully we will hear in detail on that. David, you have indicated last, and I'm going to say draw a line at that stage in terms of time, unless there's something really pressing. So David.
Thank you very much, Chair. And as you can imagine, in a session like this, a lot of the issues of interest in have been covered, and the Chair as well asked about the inclusivity of the portal and so on, following up on, I think it was Peter's question perhaps, which was one of those I was interested in. But I want probably to lead on that and say, in terms of work experience and opportunities for SEND pupils, and Alma had speaking to us, challenged us personally to look at ways in which we could take on work experience for SEND children and so on. What work is ongoing with or can be done with industry to ensure that they feel confident and supported to be able to offer opportunities to SEND young people? You know, any industry, I suspect, will have a certain degree of nervousness of the unknown, if they haven't had experience of that, if they may feel that they don't have the knowledge or know what roles people with different abilities can undertake. What work can be done to give industry that confidence that they can offer those opportunities?
Within our Skills Council, we have an Equality, Diversity and Inclusion subgroup that looks at all of the issues around inclusion, and certainly to the point that we were making earlier about economic inclusion, I suppose is the best way to put it. There's a very important piece of work that is ongoing with industry, and in particularly in collaboration with Department for Communities around employability. But I think you make a really, really good point about taking that back and that work experience piece. And I would imagine, and I think colleagues may have something to add there, that's probably an underdeveloped area that we need to pick up. And I think that's certainly one for us to take away.
Because I think particularly for SEND young people, that work experience will be beneficial to them as it is to every pupil, but it will probably be more beneficial to the companies and the industry that take them on, more so than even mainstream sort of work experience, because that they're well familiar with that, but that will be a learning experience for both, I think, and that's useful. I'm sorry if you have covered that, because I realised I was late in the issue to deal with this morning, so apologies if I'm duplicating anything that has been said. Then I guess the other thing I would like to touch on, it's more of a cultural sort of thing rather than into the nitty-gritty, and it's, do you feel we are seeing a change and a move from, I think I've talked in previous committee meetings around we have a culture here sometimes of seeing university as the gold standard, and that's touched on in some of the reports and so on. Do you think we are having success in mapping out and showing our young people the range of options that are available? I'm thinking particularly in East Belfast, some of those new industries, whether that's to do with the arts and filmmaking, and whether that's to do with cybersecurity, or whether it's advanced manufacturing. Some of those courses are equally well, if not more impressively delivered at some of our colleges. Do you think there's a greater understanding of that? And if not, how do we do that? And if so, how do we continue to encourage that?
Certainly in my time, I've noticed a major shift just in the forums that I'm in about those people who think that apprenticeships are good for their family and friends and whatnot. And then we see that also in terms of numbers. I think earlier I mentioned just the growth, especially in HLAs. I think it's like around 13-14% year on year. And then on the APSNI programme, it's the level down below. There's been significant growth over the last number of years, and that's in some of those new industries as well. So I think in terms of stakeholder engagement, what I'm talking about with schools tomorrow is how do our kids access apprenticeship opportunities. That's not an invite I would have had a number of years ago. And that's with an East Belfast ALC, I think, is it Strathern? I think, yeah. So I'm certainly noticing that, and I'm seeing it in the figure work. I think it goes back to Moira's point on what Karen was saying earlier. A lot of this comes with starting early. I think that the work that you've done shows that the aspirations and awareness of pathways are there at 7 endure for the next 10 years. So when people start to see the current crop of learners and people who come through those pathways when they're 7, that'll really stick with them, and that'll help change that culture even more.
Certainly we would see, we would see that practically coming through in terms of our schools' engagement, a shift. But the challenge we get back from schools is still how we're measuring the effectiveness at a system level. That the measure that we currently have is GCSE A star to C, and that is something that will be considered in the context of all of the other reforms going on. So how do we assess the effectiveness of our education system, and is it about a broader suite of measures? So I think that's a key issue in terms of setting that tone.
I think that's right. I was going to say, actually, from a system level, in terms of how we measure schools educationally, but also then how that filters through to how our families and parents see schools. Particularly, I'm thinking of grammar schools as well, where almost how many children they send to Oxbridge, how many children they send to universities is seen to be almost a measure of how good that school is for people who are perhaps academically gifted, and necessarily that need not be the option or pathway that they choose to take. And I think encouraging that also helps break down across society that idea that one is better than the other. Actually, it's what's most suitable to you and where you want to go is the right option for you.
From the information we get so we collect information from the schools when young people are leaving, to the school leavers data, and if you look at the destinations of where young people are going, there's been a little change where we're seeing like slightly lower proportions going to higher education and further education, and the increases are coming in employment and training.
And Karen, you spoke earlier about the access of young people, and thinking particularly in my area of the young working class, Protestant boys in particular, we know as a target audience, and how important, to be parochial for a finished question, that Castlereagh College is to them, and we obviously have seen the issue of that. So I'm glad that we've moved in a positive direction with that, and hope that continues. But that's maybe in parochial, Chair, and I'll hand you back.
I'll permit it just this once, David. That's great. Thank you. Well, look, I don't have any other indications, so that brings the formal evidence session to an end. I want to thank members, obviously, for their patience. Obviously, a lot to get through, and some members had to wait longer than others. Thank officials for engaging with the process, and I think it seems to me very likely that we will want to reconvene one of these concurrent meetings probably before long, and possibly sooner than a year, which was the time gap last time. But we do thank you for your evidence this morning. Sorry, I'm in the wrong committee. So thank you. While the officials make their way out, I'll just hand over to the clerk first of all to summarise if there are any actions arising or any particular points to note, and then we can maybe just open up for any views from members in terms of their response to the evidence they've heard today.
Chairperson, as members have heard, there's quite a few things happening shortly. Careers Action Plan, a review of curriculum, all sorts of other things, a work plan for the 14 to 19 strategy, all sorts of other stuff. What I would suggest, members, is that you may wish to agree to meet again in about a year's time to go over these matters again, but perhaps also seek to meet in about 6 months' time to pick up on childcare, which is the other issue which crosses both departments. So with a view to, again, just to be clear, we were very clear with officials from February that members wanted to talk about 14 to 19 strategy, careers action plan, CCEA regulation, etc. And they then, on Monday, sent us through paperwork saying, not much to tell you. They could have told us that, and we could have rescheduled. I would have been glad to reschedule after those things have been done. But they didn't, so that's what you got. So suggestion would be then come again to reschedule this joint concurrent, deal with childcare, say in about 6 months' time, and then back on this subject of 14 to 19 careers and the careers portal, which is some way off, but by this time next year they should be pretty close to getting the launch. If that is
that's certainly very, very happy with that as a proposal. I mean, we do have a decision-making quorum here. I think I mean, if our members agreed that that is an appropriate course of action, agreed.
Yep.
Okay. That's fine. I'm happy just to open up briefly if members have any particular points they want to raise around the evidence they've heard. I mean, I would just note. I mean, I sense there was some frustration from officials with the line of questioning, but the briefing was certainly incredibly high level, and I think we're still struggling to just come away with some of those measurable outcomes that we can look to over the next while. So I imagine that both committees will continue to pursue that. But are there any other members who want to come in, Tom? Content with where we've landed today? Okay, that's fine. So that moves us on then to item 6. Is there any other business? No. And item 7 is date, time and place of next meeting and yet to be determined. So we will pick that up probably after the summer. Thank members for your time and your engagement today. Thank you.
Committee's adjourned.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Senate Chamber. Sound. 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 Senate Chamber. Signed. 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 Senate Chamber. Signed.